Lovely, thank you. Right, welcome everybody. So we're here today to talk about products and all that sort of stuff, and I'm not going to talk about products, but I think I'm going to talk about stuff that positions why the things that ZB are talking about matter. This is a slightly jokey presentation, and it started a long time ago in a canteen far away. The canteen didn't really look like this. It looked a bit more like this. But there were a bunch of us working for a consultancy, and we were friends. We got on. We were doing some hard things. We were working closely together, and as friends tend to do in those sorts of situations, we used to have a lot of fun. And we often ate together in the canteen, and so we'd be putting the world to rights. So we'd get together, we'd be talking about how to fix things and all that sort of thing. And one of the things that came up one day as a result of this is that I came up with these 3 laws, and they were meant to be funny. They were jokes. They were about this sort of stuff. But over time, amongst my friends and family, they kind of became an in-joke that went on. More recently, one of the people that was in that group, Martin Thompson, who's an expert on high-performance computing, was presenting and stole one of my lines. So he said, as soon as you realize that most people don't know what they're doing, the world makes a lot more sense. That was part of this conversation that we were having at the time. He's quoted it as Farley's second law, and that's not quite right. He's misquoted me there. So here are the laws. Somewhere here. People are crap. Stuff's more complicated than you think. All stuff is interesting. You just have to look at it in the right way. Now I have a caveat. I have to make an apology. So I am from England. I speak English. In English, crap doesn't mean unpleasant. It doesn't mean that people are shit, or it doesn't mean that they're nasty or that they're bad or anything like that. It means that they're a bit rubbish. It means that all of us are a bit rubbish. I'm not saying that other people are crap. I'm saying all of us are crap. And I mean stuff like this. I want to know what she was thinking. Actually, more specifically, I mean stuff like this. I'm kind of intrigued what's going through that man's head. Where are my wheels gone? So this is my mental model of the human species. We're not quite as good as we think we are. We're not quite as rational as we think we are. And I want to try and convince you of that through the first part of my talk. So, I'd like a show of hands. How many people here think of themselves as intelligent, rational people? I've got news for you. So if you want to convince somebody of your argument in a meeting, what's the thing that psychologists say you need to do? What's the most important thing that you must do if you want to convince people of your argument? No, provide nice food. It doesn't matter how good your argument is, how good your presentation materials is, how nice your suit is. None of that matters as much as how good the biscuits are. We are biological entities. This stuff matters. A common phrase is "seeing is believing." Well, not really. So we're very poor observers. Did anybody notice that I misspelled? Very poor observers. Here's a little movie to demonstrate. So if you work in the software development industry, you're probably all trying to work out what's going on now. The sorts of people that work in our industry. So there are magnets under there, right? There's something weird going on. Well, not really. It's just a matter of perspective. Here's another one. This thing caused a great sensation in the British press a year or two ago. Depending on what light level you thought was going on here, you would see this dress as either white and gold or blue and black. And people couldn't, there was a big argument over whether it was white and gold or whether it was blue and black. Here's a clearer picture of that illusion, what's going on. Can you see the two squares that I've marked, A and B? So which one's darker? They're the same. What our brains are doing is actually quite complicated. What we're doing is that we're analysing the scene, we're looking at the shadows, we're saying this grey square is in a shadow and is a certain shade, therefore it must be lighter than this other grey shade, which is in the light and is actually the same shade. Our brains are processing things and they're putting meaning on top of the thing that we see. Our sense of colour, our sense of perception, our visual system is not a pure system. We're not measuring light levels and have a fixed impression of what a particular colour is. We make it up. So watch I apologise for the jingoism of showing the British flag, but it was the only picture that I found that demonstrated this illusion. Stare at the dot for a few seconds. Now, if you were looking at the dot, you should see the British flag in its full colours. This is because the way in which your visual system works is it's using chemical processing. There are chemical reactions going on in your retina, and there's a persistence, there's a time lag, there's a latency to the way that system works. Here's another one which I think is even more impressive. Again, if you stare at the dot, please. Now, it takes a little time because I'm programming your visual system. Now, if you look at this, it looks in colour. Actually, this is a black and white photograph. There is no colour there. Any colour that you see is made up by your mind and your visual system. Here's another one, a different kind of illusion. If you look at this picture, my guess is that you'll probably see it moving. There's something quite complicated going on here. What's happening is that your visual system is actually very narrow. The amount that that your eyes can perceive is a very narrow part of your field of vision. And the way in which your vision system works is that your eyes scatter about the scene and paint the picture in your mind over time. And that's quite a slow process. It's quite difficult. And when you've got a complex image like this, your eyes are scattering about and they're painting the picture. Your brain is actually switching your vision off between the times when your eyes move, and when it switches them back on, because this is a complex picture, it looks as though it's moved a little bit. So as your eyes move around, it looks as though this thing rotates back and forth. Here's another one, and I love this one. There are only 4 circles here, and they don't touch. Come on, brain. So I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to black them out. There are the circles. And now I'm going to uncover them. And you still can't see that there are only 4 circles here. Here's another one. This is really simple. It's just a series. It's just a grid with some dots. If you're looking at this, my guess is that you're seeing some dots are black and some are white. And there's nothing going on. There's no animation. There's no tricks apart from the tricks that are in your brain here. And we get these sorts of visual illusions that we're common with this sort of perspective. If you're standing precisely the right place, you get this weird effect, this piece of literally street art that was carried out somewhere in Canary Wharf. So as the way in which our biology imposes on us our perceptions of reality is complicated, and it tends to fool us. We're evolved creatures that have adapted over time to be able to perceive reality, but it's not real reality. It's just what's going on in our heads to a large extent. The physiology of our visual system and the ways in which that works with our brains is much more complicated than we think it is. Here's another picture. My bet is that not only can you recognize this, guess which sex this human being is. Actually, it's none of those things. It's an animation of a bunch of dots. This isn't a photograph of somebody with lights on them. This is just an animation. It's entirely made up, and our brain fills in all of the gaps. This is true not just for our visual systems. This is true about everything that we perceive. I'm going to play you some sounds, and these sounds are made. This is kind of false speech made up of sine waves and only sine waves. My bet is that if you haven't heard this before, the first time you hear it, you won't understand what's being said. Then I'm going to play you what's being said. Then I'm going to play you the sound again, and you will understand it.
The camel was kept in a cage at the zoo.
The psychologists say that once you've heard these, pretty much forever, you'll be going to hear the sound correct.
The man read the newspaper at lunchtime. He was sitting at his desk in his office.
Here they all are again. Our brain is filling in huge amounts of detail. It's making up loads of stuff here, the stuff that's not really there. That's one of the things that our brain is good at. Here's another one. So here's I'm going to show you some words, and you shout out the colour of the words. It's harder than it seems, isn't it? It's, fairly obviously, if you do this with kindergarten children who can't read yet, they'll get them all right. That's because the way, we are trained to believe, to understand that it's what the word says that's important, not the colour of it. And so our brain prioritises that. When we look at these things, we prioritise the fact, the meaning of the word over the thing that we've just been asked to look for. And so it becomes difficult to cope with that dissonance. I have got a point in this stuff. In Britain, we're quite proud of the fact that for the first time for about 100 years, we've got somebody that can play tennis. So I just want to walk through a little example of something that we're talking about. So this is Andy Murray. Let's imagine that you're at the other end of a tennis court from Andy Murray, and you're going to receive his serve. Okay? So let's also imagine that he's having a bad day. He's already served the first serve and missed. This is his second serve, and it's not a very good second serve, so it's only doing about 100 miles an hour. That's 160 kilometers an hour. So let's say it's 100 miles an hour. What does that mean in terms of your time to react? Well, 100 miles an hour is about 45 meters per second. And the speed of light is roughly 300,000 meters per second, which has the lovely property, at least if you use imperial measures, that about 1 foot is 1 nanosecond. Which is I'm a geek. I like that kind of thing. The length of a tennis court is about 78 feet, about 24 meters. And so that means that you've got about 78 nanoseconds for the light to reach you from the point at which Andy Murray starts his serve. So that's one starting point for how much time we've got to react. So here's our eye. Here's the light arriving. And that's going to take about 78 nanoseconds to get from one end of the court to another. Now, the message has got to get from our eye to our brain. And that's going to go through all of this squishy stuff in our heads that's going to take about 15 milliseconds. Dramatically slow compared to the speed of light. But that's not the slow part. That's just to get the message from our eye to our subconscious part of our brain. If we want to be able to actually think about that, to actually reason about that, to consciously understand what's happened, it's got to transition from our subconscious mind to our conscious mind. And that takes about 300 milliseconds. This is a third of a second, dramatically slow in comparison. So let's do the maths and sort of figure out where the ball needs to be for us to start reacting and moving to return the serve. So we've got 300 milliseconds plus 15 milliseconds plus 78 nanoseconds. That's our time to react. If we do the maths, the distance of that is about 46 feet. So that's 46 feet from me returning his serve to Andy Murray's side. That means that the ball's still on his side of the court. The court's 78 feet long. The ball has not even crossed the net by the time you have to already have decided what you're going to do. You can't wait for it to bounce. You can't wait for it to land and see what's going to happen. That's not how it can work. Stuff's more complicated than we think it is. It's difficult to do these sort of things. What's actually going on here is professional athletes don't do this stuff. They train themselves over and over again so they can do it like this. They through deliberate practice and rehearsing the same moves over and over again, they learn to react instinctively without any conscious thought. So they'll have begun moving as soon as he starts raising his arm. There's a great video of Cristiano Ronaldo, the Real Madrid footballer, who volleying a ball into a goal. And there's somebody crossing the ball in from the corner post, and they're doing this indoors, and then they start turning the lights off. So first off, they'll turn them just before he's about to hit the ball, and then they turn them further back until they're turning the lights off before the guy's actually kicked the ball at the corner post. This athlete has trained himself through repetition so that just by the body language of the person that's about to kick the ball, he can figure out where the ball's going to be and get the timing right to hit the ball and volley it into the net. So there's more going on than we think. What we're talking about here is the difference between something called fast and slow thinking. This is neurophysiology. This is the way that our brains work. And I'm going to give you a demonstration. So I'm going to show you two calculations. Here's the first calculation, and here's the second. My bet is that you got very significantly different responses in your mind when I showed you those two calculations. The first calculation, what almost certainly happened was that the answer to that calculation was presented to your conscious mind before your conscious mind had time to recognize that the calculation was on the screen. This is the 15 millisecond thing. This kind of comes straight to the forefront of your mind. The second calculation, my bet is that what happened in your mind was something along the lines of, Dave's just shown me a calculation. Do I know the answer to this one? No. Can I be bothered to work it out? No. That's going to be taking a third of a second or longer. This is a dramatic difference. We can train ourselves through deliberate practice to move things from one to the other, but it's hard work. Here's another one of those things. Could I ask everybody to fold their arms, please? Thank you. Now can you do it the other way around? It feels really different, right? It feels weird. That's because since you were a child, you've learned to fold your arms and you do it one way around. Whichever way around, people do it a different way. It doesn't matter. You've trained yourselves to do that. But doing it the other way around requires a conscious, deliberate act. The wonderful thing is that if you put somebody in an fMRI scanner while they're doing this, you get really different pictures. The system one thinking, the fast thinking, the 15 millisecond response time, you get this tiny part of your brain that lights up. System two thinking, the conscious thinking, the slow one, 300 milliseconds, half your brain lights up. We burn more calories when we apply conscious thought. When we're being rational, when we're really reasoning about complex problems, we're using more energy. Guess what? We are biologically adapted to avoid wasting energy. We are biologically adapted not to think rationally. If we want to think rationally, it's literally hard work. We're literally using more calories to process information on a rational basis than we are on an irrational basis. We're programmed to avoid this kind of thinking. We tend to jump to conclusions on the basis of just what we did before. We've seen this sort of pattern before, therefore this is the answer. We much prefer that sort of response. This is one of the reasons why the gambling industry exists. If we do these things rationally, it's very hard to justify the kinds of the probabilities that take place, because the gambling industry wouldn't exist if it wasn't in their favour. It would make sense. So there are lots of these sorts of things that happen that are a normal part of human experience. We tend to be poor observers. We tend to have confirmation bias, where we'll try and reinforce the opinions, our own opinions, and selectively seek out information to back them up. We have polarization of opinion, where if we're working in groups, we'll all try and agree on the same things, and we'll gradually walk off and be doing more and more irrational things and not noticing. To some extent, I think that describes quite a lot of the software industry. And we have this illusory association between events. Says, oh, well, that happened and that happened. That must be the cause of this bug. Well, maybe. Here's a little video of some of these things pulled together. It's the best example I know of persistence of discredited belief. At one point, there's one of the defenders that's standing there. He could have stepped aside and stopped the guy running, and instead he just watches him. He's thinking, what's going on here? He knows that something's wrong, but he doesn't do anything anyway. So what's my point? What's all this for? Okay, it's been entertaining, I hope, but what's the real point? It's this. Science is our defense against our biological failings. We as a distinct species have existed for about 200,000 years. And if you look at most measures of progress and success, through much of that period, it's kind of a flat line in terms of the amount of information that we process, the resources that we have access to, the energy that we wield, the number of connections that we have with all of these things. It's essentially a flat line through virtually all of human history. And about 200 or 300 years ago, it starts to tick up. And then through the 20th century and the 21st century, it goes exponential and it's vertical. There's data that suggests that every 14 months, the entirety of human knowledge doubles, which is staggering. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And I would put that down to the application of the scientific method. I'm not talking about Large Hadron Colliders and space shuttles and modern medicine and all those sorts of things. I'm just talking about the scientific method, the four-step process that allows us to avoid fooling ourselves. I believe that software development is one of the most difficult things that human beings undertake. We build these massively complex systems out of stuff that is incredibly abstract and fragile. A comma in the wrong place can blow your spaceship up, or lose you $500 million, or whatever it is. These things happen. They really go wrong. And so, shouldn't we be using our strongest problem-solving technique to solve our hard problems? I think we should. This is a picture of Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was an experimental physicist, a theoretical physicist, and a Nobel Prize winner. He's probably one of the finest minds that humanity's created. He was certainly one of the finest minds of the 20th century. Came up with an idea that helped solve equations in a field called quantum electrodynamics. It's the most accurate predictive tool that humanity's ever invented. It's 3 orders of magnitude more accurate than general relativity. This man was a genuine first-class genius. And yet, these are the things that he said about science. So science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Don't trust what anybody says, do the experiment. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. And if it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, if you guess, and that guess can't be backed by experimental evidence, then it's still a guess. So we should be working in ways that allow us to try and avoid guessing. We should be working in ways that allow us to verify our ideas. We should be working in small packets of ideas, validating those ideas, learning from what we see and moving on. This is what I'm talking about. This is the scientific method. This is what Wikipedia says the scientific period is. So we need to make a guess based on experience and observation, propose an explanation, make a prediction from the hypothesis, and test the prediction. Repeat. And that's it. That's the thing that's moved us from essentially being agrarian cavemen to living in the complex high-tech world that we do today. So some more little fun games. So have people seen this optical illusion before? So the trick is, which is the bigger dot, the one on the left or the one on the right? Show of hands for the one on the left. No. Show of hands for the one on the right. Let's do the experiment. They're the same. Okay, here's another one. Have people seen this one before? Okay, which line is longer, the one on the left or the one on the right? Show of hands for the one on the left. No, one on the right. Okay. The one on the right is longer, because I cheated. You can only find that out by doing the experiment. If you just trust me, or you just work on your past experience, you'll be wrong. I want to tell you a little story. So my wife says that I'm a serial nerd. I'm a nerd in multiple dimensions, and one of the dimensions in which I'm a nerd is that I'm fascinated by aviation and the space program. So I want to tell you a little story based on the space program. So in 1961, JFK went to Congress and said, by the end of this decade, we're going to put a man on the moon and return him. And all of the people in NASA went, because they had no clue how to do any of that. At this point in history, this was 2 weeks after the first American manned space mission, which was a suborbital flight, went about 50 miles above the atmosphere and came back down. Not even an orbit of the planet. So Kennedy's just painted this, established this purpose. It's given this vision, this challenge, this direction in which to go. And here are the things that NASA didn't know how to do at that point, which is basically all of it. At this point in history, NASA's space rockets were blowing up on the pad. When you see the jokey films of all the space rockets were blowing up, that's when this came from. They didn't know about multi-stage rockets. They hadn't done that yet. They hadn't been able to make that work. No human being had been able to dock two spaceships in orbit. They hadn't built spacesuits. Nobody had done a spacewalk left. They hadn't had the idea, let alone built the device of having a separate vehicle to land on the moon to getting there. So they'd assumed that they're going to send this big complex vehicle all the way to the moon, land it on the moon, and then launch it and fly it all the way back and then land it on Earth. All of this stuff, none of this stuff did they know how to do. So when you've got a problem on that kind of scale, what do you do? So I think if you're anything like me, you could probably think of NASA being quite a bureaucratic kind of, engineering, sort of very, very thorough. And they certainly did lots of design and lots of thinking ahead. But, these are all focused on this goal, this vision of where it is that they want to go. Here's a picture of the Earth-Moon system. This is a classic sort of picture that you'll see in a kid's book about space. And it's a lovely picture. Unfortunately, it's wrong. This is a picture of the Earth-Moon system to scale. At this point in human history, no human artifact had been more than 1 pixel away from the Earth. So there's the first challenge. So what's the first experiment? What's the thing that we can learn from? So you can imagine the conversation in NASA. I know. Let's put 3 astronauts in a spaceship, shoot them at the moon, and see if they come back. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's not the best way to keep the space program going to the end of the decade. So, okay, well, let's launch the spaceship to the moon, see if we can bring it back, but leave the people out so we don't kill anyone. Okay, well, that's better. It's a bit less risky, but it's an awful long way to go all the way there. And then we've got to come all the way back. That's really complicated. How about we launch a spaceship from the Earth and land it on the moon? Yeah, that's good. That's a lot simpler. At least we don't have to do the coming back part. What does landing mean? Well, it doesn't have to survive the landing. We could just crash it into the moon. That's this program. This is the Ranger program, and these were spaceships as bullets shot at the moon. So how did that go? So the first mission, mission objective was to launch this and get it into Earth orbit. It blew up on the pad. The second mission was to get it into space, get it into orbit. It blew up on the pad. This part you'll probably recognize. What happens when your project is starting to go Go slow. Well, you move. The next mission, we're going to go for the moon. We haven't got one into orbit yet, but we're going to go for the moon. So they did that. They got it, and they got into orbit. It did the deorbit burn. It shot towards the moon, and it missed. The fourth one, it got into orbit. It did the deorbit burn. All of the systems on the spaceship failed. And they managed to observe externally that it hit the moon. So it was kind of a success, but they had no data. The fifth one missed the moon again. The sixth one, it hit the moon. They got the telemetry, but the cameras failed. So they hadn't got the data from that either. The seventh one was a success. The eighth one was a success. The ninth one was a success. So I just want to pause for a moment. Just imagine the situation in NASA. So certainly in the Western world, you've essentially got unlimited resources. You've got the president that said, this is a thing that we've got to do. We're doing this thing. You've got a massive budget on an unusually large scale. You can have pretty much, it's the kind of mission that's going to appeal to almost anybody. You can have the best engineers in the world, at least in the Western world, you can appeal to those. So what do? They carried out these series of experiments and they got them wrong. But that's what experimenting means. It means working in ways that are safe. We're not killing the astronauts. We're learning. When the experiments go wrong, that's the time when we learn. If they'd started off here and they had sent the astronaut the first mission and it had worked, it had gone all the way, and they just put the astronauts in the rocket and sent them, yeah, maybe not. Maybe it was just a fluke. Maybe they just got away with it. Maybe they were just lucky. So carrying out the experiment and learning and adapting and refining their techniques over time is the way in which you solve complex problems. Has anybody come across the marshmallow challenge? This is a psychology experiment that's been carried out across the world with different groups of people. And it's really interesting. I do this in training courses sometimes. It's a lot of fun. And you get the idea is that you have 20 sticks of spaghetti, a meter of sticky tape, a meter of string, and a marshmallow. And the job is to build the tallest tower that you can that will support the marshmallow on the top. And you get all sorts of complex, interesting structures. But the thing that's really fascinating about this is when you crunch the data and look at the data. The first thing is that architects and engineers tend to do quite well at this kind of thing. That's not really surprising. They've got specialist understanding. They understand structures. They can build structures that are going to work. The next thing that's interesting is kind of CEOs. CEOs do a bit better than average. But CEOs with executive admins as part of the mix do even better. So what's going on there? Well, what most adult groups do when they carry out this experiment is that they spend the first part of the experiment negotiating. They're kind of doing the human politics and the planning. So the first bit of the negotiation is, who's the person that's going to have the good ideas? Who's the person that's going to do as I tell them? Who's the person that's going to go and fetch coffee while the rest of us are doing the work? It's these sorts of social negotiations to figure out, if you've got a bunch of CEOs, they're quite successful people, quite opinionated people, that part of the conversation can be quite slow. If you mix in some executive admins with that group, they kind of facilitate the conversation. It goes more quickly. They get to doing real stuff more quickly, and so that they have a better outcome. The really interesting part, though, is this group, the kindergarten children. Kindergarten children outperform business school students, lawyers, and the average by a significant margin. That's because they don't have any prior knowledge. So what happens with kindergarten children, they don't do the social negotiation thing, they don't do the planning thing. They get a marshmallow and they stick 3 bits of spaghetti in it and they stand it on the floor and they go, yay! And then they raise it up a bit and they go, yay! And then they're experimenting. So pure experimental practice without deep understanding beats everything except specialist detailed technical knowledge. Experimenting is our most powerful problem-solving technique. This is Deming. Deming was a United States process expert who went to Japan after the end of the Second World War. Americans weren't listening to him very much. They went to Japan, and in large part, Deming is the father of the success of the Japanese economy through the latter part of the 20th century. It's the outcome of Deming's work were ideas like total quality management, the Toyota process, lean manufacturing, lean process control, those sorts of ideas. Deming came up with this amongst many other things. This is the plan, do, study, act model. So plan a change or test aimed at improvement. Do, carry out the change or test, preferably on a small scale. Study the results. What did we learn? What went wrong? Act, adopt the change, abandon it, or run through the cycle again. Does this look familiar? It's the scientific method. This was a conscious lift on Deming's part of the scientific method and its application to solving problems in industry and in processes. This simple technique allows us to address problems. This is where ideas of lean process control and lean thinking, lean software engineering. This is the roots of that sort of thinking. I can state from personal experience, at least from the context of the continuous delivery book, this is where continuous delivery comes from. This was in my mind when I was working on the book, is that I wanted to get to more engineering practices. I wanted to get to being able to be more deliberate about the way in which we worked. The sorts of environments that I worked in were often technically demanding ones and often high consequence software. Not just software that was running my mum's cake shop, but software that was building financial exchanges and trading systems and things like that, things where a lot of money was flowing through. And so we wanted to work in more deliberate ways. And so continuous delivery, I believe, is about the application of the scientific method to software development. It's about trying to get to carry out experiments. What we're trying to do is that we're trying to use processes, technology, and practice that form an engine, a substrate that allow an organisation to be experimental, to have lots of ideas and evaluate those ideas and figure out how to move on. Software is important. There are different kinds of software. Some software, the software for my mum's cake shop, is probably not so important. If my mum's cake shop software is not working, that's not a disaster. Other kinds of software, it's pretty serious. There are a number of things here that have been picked out. I didn't know about this one until I was doing research for this. In 1983, a Russian colonel prevented nuclear war. All of the software systems were telling the Russians that the United States had launched an all-out nuclear attack. And he didn't believe it, and so he didn't press the button, which he should have done. Software is important. We need to treat this stuff seriously. We need to think this. And on the whole, our software processes and our approaches over the years, on the whole, have not been that rigorous. I have a different presentation where and when I've had a few beers and I'm feeling more expansive, I think that what we're really talking about is we're talking about paradigm shift. This is a different way of looking at software development. This is a different kind of process. It challenges many of the assumptions that we've had about software, many of the things that we go in, the positions that we start off with, the way in which we run governance for software projects, the way in which we provision software, the way in which we build teams, the way in which we organise ourselves. Many of those things, if you see it from a different perspective, the complexity around those things falls away and it becomes a simpler thing to do. Another little story. This is the Vancouver Stock Exchange, and in 1982, the index was they implemented a new software system to run the stock exchange, and in 1982, the index was initialized at 1,000. You might as well start with a nice round number. It was then updated and truncated to 3 decimal places on each and every trade, so about 3,000 times a day. And the truncations led to a loss of around 25 points a month. 2 years later, they fixed the error, which doubled the value. of the stock exchange. This stuff is sneaky, it's slippery. We should be being more deliberate, we should be being more definite, we should be being more precise about the way in which we validate these things. So what is it that we're really looking for? And I would argue that this is true of any organization that builds software. We want to have an idea, we want to get the idea into the hands of our users, and we want to figure out what our users make of those ideas. That's it. That's what we are all employed. If you work anywhere close to the software development industry, that's what you're for. That's what your job is. That's the goal of your job. And so I think a good starting point is to say, okay, well, let's optimize that process. We'll do whatever it takes to make that as fast and efficient as we can. In addition to that, we have this idea in continuous delivery, the idea of cycle time. Cycle time is the idea, if you imagine the smallest change that you can think of to your production system, and then all of the steps that getting that change into production would take. So what you're going through your normal processes to figure out whether this is a good idea, to prioritize it, to get into the development team, to test it, to deploy it, to configure it, everything, whatever it takes. And there are two cycle times. So the first one is from a project that I worked on a few years ago in a bank, and their cycle time was 103 days. They couldn't make any change to this software system in under 103 days. If you've got a cycle time of 103 days, you have no feedback. You have no opportunity to learn. The second one is a project that was building one of the world's highest performance financial exchanges. In order of complexity, this project was somewhere between 10 and 15 times more complex than the first one. And for this project, we were using continuous delivery techniques. We could evaluate any change to our production system, whatever its nature, and be happy that if all of our tests had passed, be happy to release that change into production after 57 minutes. After 57 minutes, and if something goes wrong, it's going to be obvious what went wrong. After 57 minutes, if something goes wrong, the change is going to be small, it's going to be simple, it's going to be easy to revert. If you've got a cycle time like this, you've got lots of opportunities to experiment and learn and adapt. The other thing that's wonderful about cycle time is if you work just to optimize cycle time, if you work using an empirical experimental approach to only optimizing cycle time, I believe that as a natural consequence, you drive out all of agile theory, all of continuous delivery theory, all of DevOps, all of those things. You can't have a 57-minute cycle time if you have big teams. The communication overhead will kill you. You can't have a 57-minute cycle time if you have siloed teams. The handovers will kill you. You can't have a 57-minute cycle time if you don't have a great story on automated testing, or automated deployment, configuration management, monitoring, all of those things. You've got to solve all of those problems. So it's a great tool, and it's one of these weird things. You kind of go for this thing in order to get the things that you really want. If you go for cycle time, you get to more efficient delivery, higher quality outputs, more opportunities to delight your users as a second-order effect for optimizing for cycle time. I see software development kind of like this. It's a series of feedback loops. It's a matter of establishing these feedback loops and opportunities to learn. At the outside, we have this idea into the hands of our users and figure out what they make of it. And we have experiments in production. We have techniques like customer feedback, A/B testing, and monitoring in order to learn. The next layer down, we have executable specifications, a form of automated test in a way. We use acceptance testing and the continuous delivery infrastructure to get the feedback channel. And at the inside, we have test-driven development and continuous integration infrastructure to learn from there. That's great. But you've got to be good at all of these things to make that work, to work on the sorts of cycles that we're talking about. This is a different way of thinking about software development. It's complex, it's difficult, the tooling helps, but the culture is crucial too. And there's more to it than that. There's another dimension as well, because there's a dimension of process and the human things, the way in which teams work. So we can look at other sorts of feedback loops. I would recommend that if you want to do something to improve your software development, start applying experimental approaches. Start trying to consciously implement feedback processes. Make sure that every idea that you have, the first question should be, how do we test that? How do we know whether that was a good idea or a bad idea? So, Don't jump to conclusions. Don't start work based on guesses. Design a test instead. Don't do things because we've always done it that way, because the way that we've always done it hasn't really worked as well as it should. Don't be afraid of experiments failing. That's the most valuable kind of experiments. You need to design experiments that are cheap to fail. That's how you get to high value. Don't assume that experts know the answer, including me. Try these things out and try out what really works. Do question everything. I think the application of the skeptical mind is a vital part of this. Do make your first response to any idea. How can we test this? Whatever it is, whether it's a process thing or a technical thing, automated testing is a fundamental part of this kind of approach to software development. Work iteratively so that you can learn and adapt. Think about how to apply ideas from science like falsifiability, skeptical mind, scientific method, reproducibility, peer review. I've used all of these to wonderful effect in software projects. And I want to leave you with a thought. So the ideas of Feynman, I think these are important to us. We're working in a difficult industry. The stuff that we do for a living is hard. There's a degree to which that's why it's fun. That's why it's good. And so we need to consider that, and we need to work in ways that mitigate the complexity. So, I know what you're thinking. I said at the start that there were 3 laws, and I've really only talked about 2 of them. But I hope that I've demonstrated all of them. And with that, I'm going to leave you. I'm not trying to start religion or anything like that with my 3 laws. But here they are. People are crap. Stuff's more complicated than you think. And all stuff is interesting if you look at it in the right way. Thank you very much.